Okay, I'm recording again. And so just going back to that discussion that I started here when Lillian pointed out that one factor that was considered a very important factor in groups here was women participation. Again, I don't want anyone to get me wrong and understand that I'm against women participation. What I'm saying is that I feel that probably that their own research, what it's going to show in the future is that women have some qualities that are very important for groups. And it may even be that women in general, because of tradition before, because of how our society used to be in the past, they probably exercise that idea of having 2 ears and 1 mouth better than men. So women in general are probably better suited to collective intelligence. But first, we men have to understand that as well. Because if there's only one man, as Lillian said, oh, if there's a man, it will work. I don't think that that's probably true, Lillian. I think that, and again, I'm talking about things that would have to be studied in a scientific way. I think that men, at least the stereotype is that men are more efficient because they're more target oriented. My wife always keeps telling me that I can only think of one thing at a time. That's a good quality for some, in some instances, and a very poor quality in another, right? So being able to focus. So maybe if you had a man in a group of women, and let's talk only about the stereotype here, right? And let's say if men were there just to provide efficiency and say, well, let's, and women were there exercising the fact that they're more as the stereotype goes, more socially sensible, so that they would like to listen to others first, and or at least they would like to exchange ideas instead of imposing their ideas. I think that Lillian is right, but I'm only talking about stereotypes, and stereotypes that I think to some extent represent how our society goes, simply because in the past women were less exposed. They were mainly in the house, and men were the ones that would go out and, let's say, and bring food, the providers. Things have changed. They changed fast. I think that there are many women today that have developed all the good and the bad practices and good and bad habits of men from the past. And I think that there are men that have developed the good and bad behaviors that in the past we could qualify as women. We're mixing. So I would prefer to think, and I hope that in the future, that our studies lead us to see that what the group needs is that everyone understands that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we talk. But at the same time, everyone felt confident to express their ideas when they thought that their ideas could help for a better understanding of the world. So again, although at this moment, yeah.
Teacher.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, me, Andrea, and Lillian are helping this group be smarter. Confess.
Yeah, definitely. but notice that Lillian is the only one that is exercising. Now you did too. That is exercising that characteristic that used to be the tradition in old organizations. You know, the men are talking and the women are. It's good that you're breaking that, because I don't think that it's a male-female characteristic, or at least that I don't think that it should be like that. And there is even some, you know, in these gender studies, there is even a term that they coined, saying that they created a verb like manning, like men acting like men in the way that they stop women and they prevent women from talking and so on and so forth.
Mansplaining.
Yeah, manning.
Mansplaining, no. It's stopping.
Oh, yeah, it's there's I thought it was just manning, like manning, and as if men always stopped women. I think that it's, or men's, yeah, you said, Danilo, you said you used a different term that I think I've already seen it also.
Mansplaining and man-stopping.
Mansplaining, man-stopping, or whatever. Yeah. I think they all make sense to some extent. We see situations in which men seem to stop women simply because they are men. I think that this is all explainable against based on our past, right? I think that we should all police ourselves and understand that that's not the way to go in the future. But at the same time, I don't, I even don't like the jargon, because I think that it would be much more productive for our society, made of men and women and whoever else is around, if we just decided we cannot stop other individuals, regardless of if we're men or women. If that was a characteristic that was assigned to men in the past, I think that men should understand that that's not good, not as a characteristic of men, but it's not good as a characteristic of a citizen or a person. And I think that many times, it's my impression, probably being a male, that when you put men and women as two groups that are apart, we don't promote dialogue, we don't promote understanding. So I would prefer that instead of having a word like that, we had a word in which we described a person that stopped others when others tried to talk, showing that that's a problem, regardless of if we're talking of a man or a woman. So whenever we see an example, as I saw the other day of I think that they were showing precisely this phenomenon with a reporter or a presenter on TV talking to another presenter, a male presenter and a female presenter, and he was performing that way, stopping her whenever she was talking. I am sure that we can also find, maybe it's going to be not as common, but we'll find the opposite, because there is also women that stop others when they're trying to express their ideas. And what I'm trying to mean here is we need more this social sensitivity that is usually that I believe that is more common in women than men, because of our, let's say, our culture from the past, our society from where we came. But I don't think that it's necessarily a man or man or woman's attribute. And therefore, I think that even when we think of the verbs or the words or expressions that we're going to use to describe that situation, we would try to, I would expect that if we thought of expressions that did not relate to gender, we would be more effective in building a dialogue instead of keeping people apart. So I don't know if you agree with my way of thinking, but and I'm sure that some of the more stronger feminists would not agree, and I understand their reasons not to agree. But again, being at the other side, being let's say being that group that is that nowadays in the past was considered the oppressor, the white man, the white educated man or whatever, and feeling somehow in our current situation as the oppressed person, I think that we would probably build a better dialogue in the future if we did not stick to the stereotypes, and if we try to develop expressions, develop language that we're not separating, but we're including everyone. But anyway, this is only to say that it's a very interesting perspective, this one that Anita Wolley and some of her colleagues developed in their work. It shows us that definitely there is, that it's possible to create teams that perform better based on just even selecting the members of those teams. There are plenty of examples of situations that leads that would be good examples of this. I remember that at some stage, I think Albert Einstein and a few other scientists decided to create a university for the genius of the world. So it was genius teaching or other genius. The idea didn't prosper, and I would say that it probably didn't prosper for the same reason a team that only had Cristiano Ronaldo's or Neymar's would also not prosper. When you have too many people that have a lot to say, and again, I may be misunderstood also because of this, but when there's a lot of people that are very brainy, very clever on their own, there's probably little space for debate and for building together. They are individuals that are very strong in their own. They're very important to our society, but they are not the ones that will have probably the social sensitivity to organize a group so that that group performs better. I don't know if you would like to say anything about this. I think I touched it in several sort of polemic topics here. And although I do not want to polemize about them, I would like at least to know your impressions and see what you think about it. I don't want to exercise my man stopping and go on if if anyone still wants to say anything about this. But what were the other characteristics that that Wolley found in her studies that showed what a collectively intelligence group should be? One interesting thing that Gustavo was saying here in our WhatsApp is that Wolley says in her paper that even if the group are talking through text, the group take advantage of being more diverse in the sense of gender. And in fact, she is mentioning gender all the time, you know, and I'm sure that for her research, gender was, I mean, what she could check there was gender. But again, I claim that we may find out in the near future, hopefully, that as soon as we men become less macho in some of our behaviors, and when women become maybe more active in organizations because of understanding that they have a role that they can take there, I'm sure that this will probably switch a bit. It's not going to be seen as gender, but it's still going to be, there are some people that are more positive in the way that they talk, more, I wouldn't call aggressive necessarily, but there are some people that present their ideas in a way that their ideas are taken as, or could be taken as more important or more intelligent than other people's ideas, even when that's not necessarily the case. So yeah, and then Fernanda also mentions there the idea of diversity and social sensitivity as being important topics that appear in Wolley's paper.
And she talks about the distribution of communication in the group and the eye contact. I take note of just some of them. Eye contact, there's shouldn't be stars in the team, like you said before. The team with only stars, it's not effective. Yeah, and take off the bad apples.
I was doing my man stopping here again. It's the teachers stopping here. But when you mentioned that you only have stars, think of a team, a soccer team, where you put 11 Cristiano Ronaldos in the team. It's not going to work.
That's right.
Because all of them want to be the ones that are going to kick the ball to the goal, right? Diversity in a team is important. You have to have, and I'm probably the worst person to talk about soccer, because although I support Curitiba, I don't even know the name of one single player, right? So that means, that shows how much I understand of soccer. But again, you have to, a team to perform well needs to have a little bit of those characteristics that Atlee mentioned in his paper. The flow thing, probably here we have a good example of it. A good team is a team that works in flow, right? You don't see any individual. Of course, you may have an individual that stands out, but in general, it works well because everyone is concerned with the team and not with the self, right? So in that sense, Lilian, yeah, that's definitely a very important issue. Yeah.
But she mentioned the take off the bad apples. Bad apples could be people who is negative, who influence the others, negativity with negativity.
Not only with negativity. Think of also the situations. A bad apple could be someone who doesn't allow the others to talk, even if the person is very positive, let's say. So notice the social sensitivity here, and I have to mention that because I am, well, that's something that for me personally is difficult. I tend to be a shy person in many of my relationships. I tend to be someone who's quieter. I like to listen to what others are saying, but for example, I think of I mean, to some extent, as a professor, I have some of those characteristics that Danilo and I were emphasizing before. I tend to talk more than I should, you know. Maybe it's because of the technology here, but even in class, see, there's part of the class that is traditionally the lecture type of class. Well, it may we may all think, okay, probably the professor knows more than the students about a topic that he's been studying for longer. So you may think it makes sense to listen to what he has to say. But as a collective, I am sure, although I don't practice it the way I should, I am sure that we would all learn more if we shared more. So I'm actually not doing what I tell you that I believe that, you know, basically that happens because, I don't know, it's mainly it's because we teachers, we were students before in a situation where we didn't have the knowledges or the knowledge about how the collective would benefit most from participating more. But nowadays we do. So that's something that I have to change.
I think that it is because that top-down structure of the collective intelligence.
Yeah, no doubt about that. For example, in our classroom at the university, I cannot change the layout of that classroom. Of course, we depend on computers. And I think that it's important that all of you have access to the computers during the whole class. It's good if we want to check something, but at the same time, that sort of imposes a structure. That is that structure. There's a room for the teacher in the front, and the students are all organized in a very rigid way. In other classes, we're not doing that. I have some of you are also my students in the business graduates are also have another class with me that is technology and society, and in that class, in previous years, we've always had a round class. This time, I mean, we only had 2 presential classes before we had to turn into our to this internet format. But in our 2 first classes, we had the traditional way. We have too many students in class right now. Well, maybe at least in the class where we were, the structure played its role as well. But we should try and change that. And again, the same way as we were discussing things, is that a man-woman thing, or is it just the way we used to be and we have to change? I think there is a way we used to be in education. That was the teacher talks, the students take notes. It doesn't make sense any longer because you don't have to take notes of what I say. You know, whatever I say is written somewhere, and you have a very good access to that. So the idea, the new idea, and many of you are going to become professors as well. The main idea is the teacher will have to become just an organizer, not taking this major role in a class. But for now, it's still difficult for the teachers and for the students. The students have always been in a passive situation where they would listen to someone talking to them. And when we try to do something different, students many times think, well, the teacher doesn't want to work today, so he's pushing all the burden to us. And at the same time, students at the other end, they're accustomed to one way. We have to break this cycle because we now have not just we have technology that allows us to do better than that. Anything else about Wolley's papers for now? You will probably, even in the very short 2010 paper, you will see that they show the way that they worked with statistics to prove their points. Because in this case, they were able to assess a lot of different groups that they organized in a random way. I had a few, about 2 or 3 years ago, I had a student of mine who was he was a student from Foz do Iguaçu, Marcos, and he was very interested in studying collective intelligence from this perspective of organizing teams, because he works there in a foundation in Foz do Iguaçu. It's a research foundation, and he said, you know, I believe that if we organize our teams, research teams, considering ideas like these ideas by Wolley, we would probably perform better. And because we had this assumption, he started doing his studies in that direction. I have some of the initial writing he did. Unfortunately, he was not able to finish his dissertation, so we never ended up writing anything final about this. But at least he had already done some review, and I will include here in this topic, just below Anita Wolley's paper, I will include some of his initial ideas, because that may help some others of you who are interested in the topic as well. The only thing that it's going to be material in Portuguese. I think we never wrote anything in English with respect to that. Okay, so and then the other papers that included Anita Wolley and her colleagues. Let me just go back here to our Moodle page so that you understand what I'm talking about. These other papers here, the one from 2015, which I have in my hands, it basically goes on with some more findings related to that same topic. I think for the sake of saving time, I will skip that now. The last one you didn't have access to. I included it now. For those, mainly for those who are interested in this collective intelligence factor as analyzed by Wolley, I think that could be interesting. And I also remind you that Surowiecki, you've already read that, and I even include the pages here 30 to 32. He also deals a little bit with this idea of building or forming smarter groups, smarter teams in organizations. Maybe some of you who are interested in team building could also go back to Surowiecki. I just included last night, I included here a text by Engelbart, 95. He was probably, he's said to be the first person to mention the term collective IQ. And in fact, he even has some material that he wrote in the 60s, where he was already sort of discussing that. So I included here a few, this paper of Engelbart. It's actually him and I guess his wife, it's two, Douglas Engelbart and a female co-writer. And then I have a discussion, a debate of Engelbart and Ruy Lifson in 98, which also discussed this idea. I just browsed through those last night and found it interesting, and I included here. Wolley mentions that she uses, in order to check for people's social sensibility or social sensitivity, she uses a survey that I included here, right? I am sure that I performed really bad at this survey because even last night I was checking the survey again and I looked, basically it's what they call reading the minds through the eyes. And she has a lot of, it's not her idea originally, some other researcher had already developed this survey and she just used it as a way of checking how sensitive people were. That's one of the ones that has a lot of correlation with, you know, women respondents usually perform better. And again, I do not have any reason to think that it's a genetic thing. It's probably more a cultural thing. So there's a lot that we have to learn, we men have to learn with women with respect to becoming more sensitive. I look at those eyes, you know, read the minds with through the eyes. I look at those eyes and I say, gee, I have no clue. You know, you have, well, take the survey and probably some of you, maybe the men will feel more lost than the women. I used to have the answers for this survey. I don't right now. Last night at the hospital, I tried to look for it and couldn't find, at least not at that moment. If anyone, but I'm sure, I mean, we only had access to this survey and to the and to the answers to it through the web. So I'm sure that if any one of you is a little more interested and want to check, you will probably find the correct answers, and maybe we can then share with the colleagues here, right? And then we have two more. So if anyone finds the answers for the survey, just send me and I will include them here as well so that you can check afterwards if you did right or wrong. I can even share the results of the survey. The survey I can share the results with you, taking the names out. I don't remember if we asked the names in the survey the way we post it here, but I can anonymize it and tell you who you were if you don't remember your answers, and you can compare the results if anyone finds them. And then we still would have Salminen's paper and the other Malone paper to analyze. I think that these two papers are very important to us because they try to, again, to be very systematic in understanding collective intelligence and defining defining the genome of collective intelligence. You can see how analytical they went on that. But considering the time, my idea is that I will include questions about these two papers in our Moodle form, and that way I will probably also give you an opportunity of being more active in the discussion, right? So my suggestion is that we take a 15-minute break. It's 10:15 right now. We take a break until 10:30, and then at 10:30 we start answering or discussing that on Moodle, if you agree. Before we start this, considering that we still have a few minutes here on Zoom before it kicks us out of the room, I just like to know if you have any questions so far or any ideas that you would like to share with the group. No? If you take too long to react, I will assume that not. So, okay, so what we'll do is we'll be back at 10:30 in our Moodle platform with a few questions about the two other papers, Salmonin's 2000 and don't have the date, 2012, and Malone et al. 2010. Okay, see you then. Bye.